Hiromi Kawakami and Adam Ehrlich Sachs, Writers Speak Across Cultures, a conversation and reading moderated by Motoyuki Shibata, co-founder and editor of Monkey New Writing from Japan. This event was made possible by the University of Pittsburgh East Asian Languages and Literatures, the Asian Studies Center, and Carnegie Mellon University Modern Languages, the Japan Foundation, and Monkey New Writing from Japan. We gratefully acknowledge the generous support of Koji Yanai and the Japan Iron and Steel Federation Endowments of the University of Pittsburgh.
Hello, thanks for coming. I'm Moto. I run the Monkey magazine with Meg Taylor and Ted Goosen. Meg is based in Pittsburgh, and both the University of Pittsburgh and the CMU have been extremely supportive of us. So Pittsburgh is beginning to feel like the home of Monkey. And I'm very, very happy that our home is the real America. The highlight, we were here back in 2018, and the highlight of those events we did back then was the conversation, as Charles said, between Adam Sachs and Aoko Matsuda. And I'm very grateful to Adam for agreeing to join us again this time to do the conversation with Hiromi Kawakami. At that time, Adam had published one book, but now he has 3 books to the credit of his name. And the first one, Inherited Disorders, is extremely unusual collection of very short stories, all about father-son relationships. And his second book, The Organ of Sense, a wonderful novel, and again, a very unusual book. Let me stress that for me, unusual is 100% positive word, just like weird and crazy and zany are. And he kindly let me read the manuscript of his forthcoming novel. It's a collection of interrelated stories, Gretel and the Great War. And again, that is a very unusual take on the theme of fairy tales. And Hiromi Kawakami is, as Charles said, is one of the most beloved writers in Japan. And at the beginning of this tour, I introduced her as a writer who works in 2 genres, one more or less realistic, focusing on man-woman human relationships, and another in which she writes more about transformation, metamorphosis between people and animals. But I'm beginning to realize that I'm doing her disservice by dividing her into those 2 genres. Whichever genres she works in, she always exploring the deep human truth in different ways. And I'm convinced that these 2 writers have very much in common in the mode of writing and the subjects and the general attitude toward literature. Sorry, I've gone on too much. First, I like to thank Professor Exley for everything, and also I like to thank Professor Lowy at CMU for their invaluable help. So I like to ask these two writers first to chat a little about their own work in general, or the recent work, whichever. So could I start with you, Adam?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much to Moto and Monkey for including me. I go long stretches without discovering any fiction that I like at all, but 7 years ago, I discovered Eiko Matsuda. Today I'm discovering, or this past few months, I've discovered Hiromi Kawakami, and in the pages of the journal, I feel a closer affinity to the fiction you publish than to the work surrounding me, or the work of that mainly appears in the New Yorker and other vaunted American venues, which to me is mostly boring. So it's a great pleasure to be in your company. So I've written these 3 books. I will proudly take the label of unusual. All 3, at least the second 2, I can't really write about America. I guess I just express my feelings about America. They both take place in sort of a central Europe of my imagination, where my family is from, and which sort of is more vivid and available to my imagination than, the streets of Squirrel Hill, which I enjoy but can't write about. So my most recent novel, I call it a novel, but that's a marketing. It's called Gretel and the Great War. It's set in just after the First World War, and it's about a young woman who sort of appears wandering the streets of Vienna. She's mute. She's taken in by a neurologist who takes over her care and writes up her case in a medical journal and asks at the end for any information that anyone might have about her. And he receives one letter from one man who claims to be her father. He says her name is Gretel, will reveal nothing more about her, but sends 26 bedtime stories from A to Z that he wants the doctor to read to her, and it emerges as this, or it's supposed to, as partly his recreation of fin de siècle Vienna, which interests me for its own reasons, and partly his sort of grievance against his culture, from which he was excluded, probably for being a bad writer, his own sort of justification for what happened to his daughter, and finally an explanation of the causes of the First World War in his head. I kind of write, I guess, a sort of, I think of it as sort of historical surrealism. It's kind of like, it has something to do with historical fiction. I read a lot of history, and most of it goes to waste. I'm doing that again now, but there's something about these time periods that interests me, but I never want to be responsible. I never want to get it right. I'm never aiming to recreate them. I want to exploit them for my own psychological purposes, whatever they are.
Have people, your friends, your mentors, ever advised you to write about America, and you rejected?
I don't know if I have a mentor, but that would probably be a good thing to.
You never had that kind of pressure?
I'm thinking. I don't know if. I mean, maybe of a subtle kind for my agent in terms of the work that she reacts to. But I've tried it, and so far, I mean, maybe one day I'll get there, but it's all sort of dead on the page. I don't know if I was reading something about an interview with Ishiguro, who was saying that he wrote about Japan where he didn't grow up, as I understand it, but because it was this sort of like, because he didn't know it that well, it was a land of fantasy for him, and where he could be free. So I'm always like, I feel very constricted in my writing in all sorts of ways, and one way, writing about any autofiction or something is just the most painful thing I can imagine. But writing about the past, about people, I eventually want to write about myself, but I have to do it so obliquely that I can sort of outwit my own defense mechanisms and embarrassment and shame. And I can, and I found also that if I want to write about, say, my sister, if I just put her in the 17th century, she can't recognize herself, and I'm free to do whatever I want. To me, you just do the smallest, everything else can be identical, but if I say this is 1666, she'll have no idea. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. One of the writers I translate is Stephen Millhauser, who often writes about Europe, and I'm really feeling liberated to discover, some American writers are not intent on, writing just about, contemporary America. Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Kawakami basically writes about Japan, I think, but her Japan is, of course, not just real contemporary America we live in, but somehow a transformed place. Let her here talk about it herself.
I'm very happy to meet you. そして今のアダムさんの話とても面白かったです。まずアダムさんが変わったって言ってたっけ、
unusual。
そう、unusual って言われてる。私も言われます。ですから今日は変な話を書く小説家2人が集まったわけですけれど、でも人間自体は変じゃないということを証明するために非常に普通のお土産を彼に持ってきました。どうぞ。日本の普通のお菓子です。
So nice, so happy to be here. And first of all, Adam-san's story was just really interesting. And then, so the Moto sensei mentioned about him being unusual, his style being unusual. I actually have been told the same thing. My writing style is also, people say, unusual, but we are not strange people. So I want to prove that by giving Adam-san ordinary Japanese yummy cookies today.
Thank you so much.
それでアダムさんがアメリカのことを書かないっていうのに今聞いて非常に興味を惹かれました。
So I got really interested by his comment with he's not writing about America. 柴田先生が言ったように、私も日本のことは書いているんですけれども、で東京に住んでいますが、具体的な東京とか日本とかいう場所の名前を書くことが10年ほどデビューしてからできませんでした。So like Adam-san and Moto Sensei said, so for first 10 years I couldn't actually write about the Pacific name of Tokyo or Pacific name, location names in Tokyo, even though I'm living in Tokyo.
それともう一つ、場所だけではなく、自分と思われるような人物を小説の中に書くこともできませんでした。
I also was not able to put like the person looking like me in my works as well.
でも30年間私は小説を書き続けていますが、去年2年前に初めて自分と同じ年齢で小説家という職業で女性という人物を小説の中に書き、非常に自分の生活に近い リアルに見える小説をなぜか自分から書く気持ちになりました。
After having written for 30 years, last year for the first time I could actually write about a lady a little bit close to my age, and it's more like realistic, like me. And
いや、そうじゃないです。
but anyway, I could write about those story for the first time.
このことについてちょっとアダムさんとよかったら話したいです。
I would like to talk about this with you.
そう、書き始めてから何年ぐらい？書き始めてから何年経ち
How
ま
long
すか？
have you writing?
My first book came out in 2016, and it was a few years of failing before. Yeah, but I'm still in my first 10 years, so maybe.
初めの
Yeah,
10年ぐらいに今いるところですね。
じゃあちょうど同じですね。私もその具体的な何かを思わせる、固有名詞が使えなくて、アダムさんの場合は17世紀やヨーロッパという場所のことを固有名詞は使っているけれども自分からは遠いところ。私はもっと漠然と、地名もない、名前も何人だかわからない、そして、人間ですらないようなそういうものをたくさんその10年の間に書きました。
So you said you are in your first 10 years right now, and so it seems like a little bit like me. So I was not able to write the specific name. So you particularly picked up actually specific names, but not in America, not in the current era. You picked up the specific name, but in like 17th century Europe. So I was like that for my first 10 years of writing. So I picked up some names, but it's not the real names. Or even I picked up something, but not even human being. So it feels like a little bit similar.
So what's wrong with us? How did you get over it? What changed?
ね、どうしましょう。
No, you shouldn't get over it. Yeah.
全然大丈夫、そのままでい
The
てくだ
point
さい
of comparison is one of Hiromi's books is entitled "People from My Neighborhood," and it's often being compared with Sandra Cisneros' "The House on Mango Street" because both books were told from the viewpoint of a little girl, and it's all about this small neighborhood. But while Cisneros' books has the place name in the title, Mango Street, so it's more specific. And Hiromi's is just our neighborhood, my neighborhood, and of course, both books are wonderful. So one is beautiful, being specific, and the other is beautiful for not being
名前が
specific.
こうしっかり書いてあって素晴らしいし、一つはその
私の
はっきりしてなくてそれがまた素晴らしい。
いや、それで。
No, so I'm wondering what you felt like changed after 10 years. Was it?
10年経って何か変わりましたか？
もしかするともうそういうやり方に飽きたのかもしれない。
Maybe I'm kind of sick of being that way.
いつも新しいことをやりたいんですよね。
I probably would like to try new things all the time.
じゃあアダムさんはなぜ17世紀やヨーロッパのことを書くの？
So why do you pick up like Europe, like specifically in like 17th century?
ということを自分で分かっ
And do you know
理由が分かり
why?
ますか？
Do you know
Why?
clearly the reason why?
本当はそんな理由聞かれても小説家は普通答えなくていいんですけどね。
Probably the authors don't have to answer this kind of questions.
Well, the time period I think for that book has a particular reason, but
その時期についてはちょっと理由はあります。
I guess I would say first, I can identify the reason for the place
まあ、一応その
more
場所
easily,
に
which
ついて
is
は、場所を選んだ理由はもうちょっと
one is
簡単に
sort of Prague, where
簡単に
and the other is
説明
Vienna,
でき
and
ま
it's
すで
just,
一個
these are kind of the
一つは
regions
プラハ
that
で一つはウィーンで
my
なんか
family
こう
comes
自分の
from.
家族がやっぱり
So I feel a
元々来た
little
場
bit
所であるか
in
ら
a
まあ
maybe a special
多
case
分
as
そ
a
の
maybe this
選ん
is
だ
not
理
a
由は
split,
これ
but
がかなっていう。
we don't have super deep roots in America. In a way, my mom is from Prague, so it feels a little bit incidental that we're here, which is maybe there's like
それがこう
so the like the store of folktale that feels
なんとなくこう
available to me
ヨーロッパの方の説
would
話と
involve
かそういうのがすごく
something about like Hasidic parables from Central Europe feel closer to home than the American, like the Old West or something from the 19th century. Like none of my family was here then. The American mythology feels alien to me.
17世紀にはまあ彼の祖先はこっちにいなかったので、
So
なんとなくこう
yeah, part of it is just
遠い感じがするアメリカが。
I think as I can tell from your work too, you're interested in mythology in a canon of folktale and fairy tale, and the canon that feels my own happens not to be the one from America, just because
So mythology in America doesn't feel like
doesn't feel like
close.
mine.
まあそのアメリカの神話とかがこうなんか自分のものとしては捉えられる。
アダムさんの小説を読んだ時、私はプラハやウィーンとは違うけれどイタロ・カルビーノの話を思い出しました。
So when I read your story, Adam, the story in Prague or Vienna, I actually that reminded me of Italo Calvino, Italian author.
Yeah, and your work likewise. Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
私も
Her work very much reminds me of Calvino.
Oh my goodness, really? 読んだ時にカルビーノさんのことを思い出したの。Yeah, I really love Calvino, she said.
I actually last night I was trying to think about what about your work appeals to me so much because it's a little bit elusive, and I was trying to pin it down. And I went back to Calvino. I'm sure then the 6 memos for the next millennium, his lectures on.
ごめんなさい、何ですか日本語だと Six Memos。カルビーノ。
何のための21世紀のための6つのメモ。
なんとか案内。
So he picks out 6. These were lectures he was going to give at Harvard, but he ended up dying. But he picks out these sort of virtues of literature that he wants to defend and I think are not celebrated enough, and they all seem, there's lightness and swiftness and precision.
物語の正確さとか軽さとかなんか重さとかがすごく似てるような気がした。
私の。
So her
Yeah, so especially I actually reread Lightness because that seems to be, at least in Dragon Palace and these works, it feels like it epitomizes that.
それを読んでなんとなくこう
思ったと。
Yeah.
そんな褒めてもらってどうしましょうね。
I'm so flattered.
Well, sorry for butting in, but how's that attitude? I mean, desire to get away from, your immediate environment you live in to write. How does that affect your style? I mean, you don't aim for, good old American diction, but your work reads like a wonderful English translation of some unknown but very good European writer. And how conscious are you about, your style?
すみません、元先生、ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい、もう一回。
はい、
今
簡単に言ってください。
書いてるスタイルがいわゆるアメリカ文学らしい文章じゃなくて、むしろヨーロッパ文学のよくできた翻訳みたいに読めるっていう、そこをどこまで意識的にやってるか。
Well, paralyzingly conscious, but
まあちょっと頭がぐちゃぐちゃの中でちゃんとは考えてないけれども、まあ意識的に。
actually, I think Calvino in this essay, and he starts the essay by saying that he felt expected his whole generation of post-war Italian writers was expected to write about their surroundings,
Oh,
to write about
neorealismo.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, exactly. Yes, yes,
Neorealism.
right. And it just felt dead to him, perhaps in the same way that writing about my surroundings feels dead to me. And he explains his struggle as how to subtract all the solidity from all these things around him. I mean, he takes recourse in mythology and fairy tale in the same way. So I'm sure I was following his example.
Okay, let's ask Hiromi about the same question. そのやっぱり同じようにこうなんか今あるこう書かなきゃいけないっていうスタイルから逃れようとしたところはあるんですかね。
まあ皆さんに。
はい。I'm asking Hiromi the same question. Did you feel any desire to get away from the sort of established style?
それは多分すごくあると思います。
Yeah, it's probably so true.
日本の文学は私が、デビューしたのが1995年でしたけれどもかなり今に近いと私はそれはなしで戦後
それなし、
今に近いというのはなしで、戦後の文学っていうのがあって戦争の、に行った人たちが書いたまたは戦争を体験した人たちが書いたそれも男の人たちが書いた文学というのが非常に主流でした。
その先生が1995年のあたりってことですか？
の前です。
の前。
So
before I started to write, which is 1995, so the main stream of Japanese literature were made by mostly male writers and who particularly experienced World War II.
それでところが私が書き始める少し10年ぐらい前かなもうちょっと前かな村上春樹は、村上春樹が
Late 70s ですね。
70だから20年ぐらい、15年ぐらい前に村上春樹が書き始めて初めて私たちの世代の現代の日本というものを書き始めました。
So however, in the late of 1970, Haruki Murakami started to write stories, and then I felt like finally the same human started to write stories.
でもそれでも村上春樹は男性ですから、女性である私が書きたいこととはやはりまだ少しずれていました。
But still, Haruki Murakami is a male author, so I felt like his work is slightly different from what I wanted to write.
それではどんなふうに書いたらいいのかって考えたときに今までないスタイルリアリズムのスタイルではなく幻想的で日本のことを書いているけれどもどこのことを書いているかわからないようなスタイルが自分の書きたいことに最もフィットしているんじゃないかなと感じていたと思います。
Then at that time I thought, okay, what should I do? Then I kind of came to the conclusion, maybe I should write some, not really the lots of reality, but maybe more about fantasy, but still happening in Japan.
Do you still feel? Do you feel in general like you're moving towards realism, or is this just the most recent book? Is a
一番最近の本でどちらかというともっと現実っぽく自分のいるような世界について書いてるけれども、ずっとそんな感じでいく感じですかもう？
いや一番最近の本は非常に自分に近いものを書きましたけど、それ一つだけですね。
Well, I'm not sure because the most recent my most recent work is about almost like myself, and so lots of reality, but this is the only one, so I'm not sure.
その前の10年に書いたのはもう人類がほとんど滅びる時代のコミュニティいくつかのコミュニティのことを書いた大きな鳥にさらわれないようという小説、これは今年の秋に英語で出版されます。
So in last 10 years, so I wrote, actually, this book will be published this fall. It's called 大きな鳥にさらわれないよう. The English title is Under the Eye of the Big Bird, and it's about the 何でしたっけ？
人類がもう滅びようとしている
almost like about the future, the human beings will be almost gone completely.
でそこに生きているいくつかのコミュニティの人たちなんです。
And then this
Sorry,
book is about
set in the future? Or set in the future.
背景がフューチャー未来ってことで、and I wrote about several communities, the people about living in several communities.
でその後に書いたのが3度目の恋という、これは6月にテッド・グーセン訳で出るんですけど、これは現代と300年前の日本と1000年前の日本を現代の女性の意識が行ったり来たりする、そういう話です。
So the previous novel that I wrote from Under the Eye of the Big Bird is it's called The Third Love, 三度目の恋. It's actually will be published by
6月
yeah in June, translated by Todd Goosen. It's about the women like me.
私では
あ、じゃない。あ、ごめんなさい。Women's consciousness, and this consciousness is kind of moving to right now the current time and 300 years ago and also 1,000 years ago. So her mind is just going back and forth. So I wrote this kind of story.
So both of you are publishing a new book in June.
そう、6月に新しい両方とも出ると。
川上さんが僕にメールで作家ってのは嘘つきだけどアダムは自分より大きな嘘つきだって言ってて、あのあたりを聞かせてもらう。In one of our emails we exchanged, Hiromi said writers are liars, so fiction is basically the art of lying. And to me, well, Hiromi said, to her, Adam is a bigger liar. How do you respond?
Thank you.
Honored, of course.
I think she's the bigger liar.
川上先生の方が
Well, I'll tell you-
嘘つきだと思います。
She has the power to lie directly, right? The man was an octopus, or
男の
or
人がタコだとか、まあだから非
this
常
was
に
my.
もうまっすぐ
There
な
are these.
嘘というか
They kind of remind me of
強い
Kafka. You know
強い
that
嘘
declarative sentence right at the beginning of a story. I woke, Gregor Samsa woke up transformed into a cockroach, and which I really admire the ability to be such a liar. Because,
Sorry, Adam, are you talking about Kafka?
well, but I'm saying
Oh, yeah.
that I think,
こう
at least in Dragon Palace,
あの
she
か
the
カフカみたい
boldness of
になんか
the.
非常に起きてみたら虫になる
Because I feel like
まあそういう感じの非常に
The problem with me is I want to lie, but I have a
つく
good student. I have a conscience that so I have to put everything in found documents, which I attribute to idiots who are in the care of insane psychiatrists. So I feel like I work my way sort of laboriously and diligently into a state of lying. But,
So you're a more elaborate liar.
maybe that's right.
Sorry, you're about
手の込んだ嘘つき。
なるほど直線ボールかってこと
でもね、私は自分のついた嘘の世界には住みたくない。アダムのついた嘘の世界に住みたい。それですごく嘘が上手だなと思ったんですよ。
But I don't want to live in my world, but I want to live in Adam's world. That's why I thought Adam's lying skill is much better than mine.
アダムはどっちに住みたい？
Which world do you want to live in? My world or your own lying world?
Yeah, I'll live in your world of sea creatures having sex with all sorts of human beings. That sounds fun. Yeah.
川上先生の世界に住みたいです。いろんな生物とセックスをするみたい
My
な。
world is chase scientists who are, losing their minds in isolation. I'll live in your world.
絶対そちらの先生の方に住みたいです。
You mentioned Calvino and Kafka. Who else have inspired you as a
他
writer?
になんかこう、
影響された人。
Please.
そうね。いや忘れちゃうんですよ固有名詞を、固有名詞書いてこなかったから。
I didn't write down my favorite author who inspired me, but
Or in other words, how are you inspired by other people's writings or other,
他の作家
writers?
さんが書いたことでどういうふうにこう影響を受けるか。
Especially literature from other countries, from
外
overseas.
国からの文学でどんな影響を受けるか。
私が読んできたのは日本の作家よりも外国の作家の方が多いです。
I've been reading probably more foreign countries authors than Japanese authors.
そしてSF 小説がとても好きです。
And I'm a big fan of science fiction novels.
J.G. バラード、
J.Z.
バ
Ballard.
ラやそうですね。まあたくさんいるんですけれども、
There are so many other my favorite other
それから
authors.
日本のその戦後の文学はあまり読んでこなくて、
I haven't written many of the Japanese literature, especially after World War II, right after World War II.
アメリカの文学もたくさん読みましたし、
I
ヨー
read
ロッ
more
パの
lots of American and
ヨーロ
European
ッパの文
literature.
学も大好きですね。ですから多分どの小説家に影響を受けたというよりも、そういうものを読んできた全部が私の中に入っていて、それが小説を書かせているかなと思います。
Probably I was inspired by all of the literature that I've read in my life. And
Yeah, I also read primarily in translation, especially German translation. So I go on about him a lot, but Thomas Bernhardt, the great Austrian writer, is a big influence, but also lesser known. Gert Hoffmann, Gert Janke. For this most recent book, I was reading a lot of. I think the reason I like the historical settings is I can just read a lot of particular. So I was reading a lot of Van de Siècle, Austrian, Viennese, writing Karl Kraus. I don't know, the great, he has this 700-page unperformable play about just kind of basically a rant against the New York Times of Vienna, and its sort of march to war, which again feels relevant. And Elias Kennedy. And this is mostly for this previous book. I'm mixed on Kennedy's memoirs. I think are quite good. I haven't finished his novel. But, Oh, and Kurt, do you know Kurt Schwitters, who mainly is known as an artist, but he has he wrote fairy tales throughout his life. It's just one volume of them, but they're very funny and weird.
アーティストのクルト・シュビッタースの
いや知らない、
アーティストなんですけど、小説も一冊書いてる。
読んでみます。もし手に入ったら。
I'll probably read that fairy
I'll
tale.
give
Yeah.
it to you.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask the two writers to read from the writing, and then take questions from the audience.
So this is my next book, Gretel and the Great War. So I'll just read the first page, which is kind of like a preface, and then one story from it. In November 1919, a mute young woman was found wandering the streets of Vienna. She was handed over to the care of a neurologist who wrote up her case in an issue of Nervenkrankheiten. No lesion, he concluded, could explain her condition, nothing organic, only a childhood deprived of language. Since she could not say who she was or what had happened to her, he welcomed correspondence from anyone with information about her past. He received a single response from a patient at a Corinthian sanatorium who claimed to be her father. The girl's name, the man wrote, is Margareta, Gretel, and her childhood, whatever its privations, hardly lacked for language. Indeed, until his present confinement put an end to it, he used to tell her a bedtime story each and every night. He wrote now only to resume that cherished ritual. The doctor was asked to read her the enclosed story titled A, the Architect. She would understand it. The next day brought another story, B, the ballet master, and the next day another, C, the choir master, until there were 26 of them. Then they stopped and the man wasn't heard from again. Whether the neurologist read her these stories, whether she understood them, whether she ever acquired the faculty of speech, not known. The letters were later sent on to Dr. Hans Prinzhorn, presumably in hopes of their inclusion in his celebrated collection of The Art of the Mad. Evidently, Prinzhorn found them unsuitable. They turned up in his archives some 80 years later. So that's the beginning, and then I'll read O for obstetrician. The obstetrician. He is permitted to tag along with the team of illustrious obstetricians attending the Duchess at the birth of her child, but in light of his rank and accent, he's instructed not to do or to say anything, only to observe. What he can't help observing, however, is that the swaddled child, which the beaming Duchess cradles in her arms, and which she claims emerged from her without the slightest struggle moments before the doctors rushed in, is a doll, a cloth doll with a porcelain head, and even if she refers to it repeatedly as a boy, a girl doll at that, whose long blonde hair has been crudely hacked off. On its ear is a tag from Egger's Toys. Yet none of the more senior obstetricians can bring himself to point that out. When the Duchess asks for their medical opinion of the little boy, they all say he looks healthy and strong. Not one of them says it's a doll. He has your Grace's eyes and his Grace's ears, not, it's a doll, look at the tag. They trip over each other to praise the length, weight, and complexion of the child without even mentioning that his head is made of porcelain. Only the assistant obstetrician remains silent. That does not escape the Duchess, who now demands his opinion. He glances at his superiors, clears his throat. Even after many years in the city, he hasn't learned to be so dexterous with the truth. So what he hears himself saying is that in his judgment, it is not a boy at all, but a doll, a porcelain doll, and a girl doll at that, whose hair has been hacked off. All around him, he can feel the illustrious obstetrician stiffen, and indeed the Duchess begins to yell, but not at him, at them. She banishes them from her presence, everyone out except this young man. And as they close the door behind them, they can hear her telling him that at long last she has found an honest doctor. Now that it's just the two of them, the Duchess begs the assistant obstetrician's forgiveness for the foregoing test. It had to be done to find a doctor she could trust. For while this is indeed a doll, the truth is that she has given birth to a baby boy. But the Duke is not the father. The father is the Duke's gamekeeper. If the Duke were to discover that, there is no telling what he would do to the boy, for whom the Duchess has great plans and who is the only creature in the world who can be said to depend completely on her love. That is why the assistant must take him. Please, you must. Just till the boy is big enough to defend himself, then she will come for him. The Duchess calls out the name of a maidservant who enters with a swaddled infant she carries over to the assistant and places carefully in his arms. On the one hand, he has never had the least interest in caring for a creature of his own. On the other hand, he reveres the Duchess and is very much moved by her plight. He therefore feels a most ambivalent feeling when, peering down at it, he sees that this too is a doll, a cloth doll with a porcelain head. There's an Egger's tag attached to its ear. With even greater reluctance than before, the assistant obstetrician is compelled by his conscience and his oath to draw her attention to that fact. But the Duchess is not upset. She is delighted. Yes, she says, the second test. The maidservant exits and returns with a third swaddled infant. This time, she's remembered to cut off the tag, but still, it's a doll. And it is now clear to the assistant that if there are any more newborns waiting in the wings, they too will be dolls. All will be dolls. Cloth dolls from Eggers with porcelain heads whose blonde hair has been hacked off. The Duchess says, my daughters no longer need me. They only need their father, but with this one, it's different. Imagine, after 7 daddy's girls, a mama's boy. You must take him. You must. Whether it serves her interests psychiatrically to pass any more of her tests seems doubtful to him, so he accepts the doll and takes it home. In doing so, he has not strayed from the truth because he never explicitly conceded that it was a living creature. Nevertheless, he is troubled. His medical training cannot tell him whether in accepting the Duchess's doll he did the right thing. He therefore buries the doll deep in his closet and does his utmost to forget the whole incident. Yet the medical establishment, humiliated before their own Duchess by a Slavic upstart from their empire's most backward province, has no intention of letting him forget it. First, they try to cajole him into divulging what happened after their expulsion. When they fail to extract that from him, they begin to persecute him. They stalk him through the ward. No longer can he examine patients or perform procedures without a superior watching his every move. The orderlies harass him with their mops. The nurses countermand his orders. Formerly close colleagues make him repeat himself again and again as if they cannot possibly comprehend him through an accent which, in point of fact, is so faint as to be basically non-existent. They innocently inquire about the ethnic significance of his hat, a hat they know perfectly well was purchased right here in the city and at one of the most high-end hatters. They inquire about the ethnic significance of his trousers that were purchased here. All of this is to impress on the assistant that he isn't one of them and never will be, no matter how much he dresses like them, no matter how deeply he succeeds in drilling their tongue into his brain, that his pathological adherence to the truth is a primitive relic of a people and a place he has not transcended and never will, not even if he lives in the city for 1,000 years. At last, he is obliged to quit the clinic and go into private practice. Even still, the torment continues. No sooner has he begun building his practice than an appalling rumor finds its way to his patients, that he had confined a child to a closet in his home, that this child lived its brief life in absolute darkness, that it never knew to wail since it had no awareness of the existence of others, that because he had deprived this child of all possible concepts, including space and time and cause and effect, its psyche could not even be imaginatively entered into by those sympathetic souls who yearned to have a sense of how it suffered before it died, and that such things are commonplace among the South Slavs. How easy it would be to put this rumor to rest. He'd need only show the world the doll. The world would see it wasn't a child. And if the medical establishment circled the wagons and tried to pretend it was a child, that claim could easily be proved false. But not without betraying the confidence of the Duchess, not without exposing her to ridicule. And that is something the obstetrician won't do. For even as he loses his illusions about the city, he preserves his reverence for the family at its heart. This reverence comes at a terrible cost. He loses his patience and his practice. In upholding the dignity of the Duchess, he falls into destitution. In order to survive, the obstetrician pawns all of his belongings, first his fashionable hat and trousers, then everything else. Finally, the only thing remaining in his closet is the traditional festive costume of his homeland and the porcelain doll that caused all of his woes. He hasn't laid eyes on either of them in years. Neither is exactly as he remembers it. The doll is a little smaller, the festive costume a little more elegant. When he came to the city, he brought this festive costume with him only to placate his mother, whose heart would have been broken had he left it behind. She insisted he would find occasion to wear it. How he had laughed at that. But now he sees that his mother was right. He puts on the traditional festive costume. And not only because he has nothing else, he's wearing it because he wants to. He holds the doll to his breast and sings it the Slavic folk songs that were sung to him as a child. After a few such episodes, he begins to feel, strange to say, that he is transforming into a mother himself with the stupendous self-sufficiency of a mother. The borders of his world shrink vertiginously. He begins to feel that the empire can do with him what it will so long as it leaves him this creature to care for. Of course, he knows that he is not a mother, that he can never be a mother, not really. An obstetrician stands close to motherhood, but always apart from it. He can't become a mother, yet he feels exactly like one. He could even swear that something is growing inside of him. He does not know what it is, but he can feel it moving. One day he receives a coded communique from the office of the Duchess. The communique states, in effect, that the Duchess's doll is to be returned to her. That is all. There's no mention of restitution. There's not even an expression of gratitude. The porcelain doll is as much his now as it is hers. He too has great plans for it. However, he knows he has no choice but to return it to her, and he intends to do so just as soon as he knits it a festive costume of its own. He knits it the costume. Then, in the stuffing of the doll, by means of an incision concealed by this festive costume, he implants an incendiary device set to go off at a date and time of his choosing. Then he sends the doll to the ducal residence. Yes, something really is growing inside of him. The obstetrician can feel it kicking and thrashing. It's impatient. It is ready to be born. It yearns to see the light of day. But it's not a fetus. No, it is no fetus. It's a nation state. Thank you.
Did you know that piece would end with the word nation state when you started writing? Or is it secret?
No, I'm trying to remember. The way I wrote these is I wrote these by walking around a lot without writing anything down until I'd written the whole thing in my head, almost like word for word. Partially because I have a phobia of Microsoft Word, and if I can't see it and the cursor, and so when I started writing it, I think I knew it was finished when I had that word. Before I wrote anything, I had it, but there was a lot of walking before I got there.
Okay. Thank you for your wonderful reading.
Thank you.
いや、今柴田さんがその質問をしたのには訳があります。
So there is actually a reason that Moto sensei asked that question.
何日か前にニューヨークでケリー・リンクという小説家と対談しました私は。
So a few days ago, in New York, I was talking with the author,
Kelly Link.
Link.
で彼女も私たちと同じように変な小説を書く小説家です。
And then she's also the unusual writer. So I use the strange, but yeah, the same as us.
でそれぞれに私と彼女はどうやって書くかということを話したんですね。
So we talked about, I talked with her about how we write.
私もアダムと一緒で最後が分からずに書いています。
I'm writing like you, Adam. I start to write without knowing what's the end.
歩き回りながらね。
And walking around also.
でもケリーは最後だけを決めてるんですって。もうはっきり決めてる。
But Kelly knows, and Kelly actually decides what the ending is like.
だからちょっとそれを知りたかったのかな、柴田さんもと思いました。
So I thought maybe Moto sensei also wanted to know this one.
朗読始める前にもう一つ彼と話していいかな。
So before I read, I'd like to talk with you, Adam, one more thing.
じゃあ書くときにアダムは何を決めているかというと構造を決めてるっていうふうに昨日聞きました。
So when I talked to you briefly about how to start writing, yesterday we were briefly talking about that, and you said you kind of decided the structure first.
そのことをちょっと教えてくだ
So
さい。
I would like to know about a little bit more about that.
I feel like I don't have a book until I have some sort of like structural. I can't think. I don't start with a character. Don't start with a theme. I usually have, or at least so far, I've only written 3, but it's
今のところ3冊しか書いてないんだけれども、登場人物からは絶対始めない。
I feel like the first thing that comes to me, if anything does, and I don't know if it ever will again, it hasn't been a while, but is this sort of structural conceit. And by the way, this again, I feel an affinity to Calvino, or maybe his like the weight of his legacy, because if on A Winter's Night a Traveler or Invisible Cities, or any of his great. Not so much the early stuff, but his great later masterpieces. It feels like there's before anything else a structure that and the structure dictates the content in some way.
それもその後期の作品はすごい構造がこうどっちかというと支配的で、それに内容がくっついてくるって感じだと思うんですけど。
Yeah. So I mean, I think I vaguely knew I liked this territory, the world, but I had no. But it was kind of thinking of it in conjunction with the books I was reading to my daughter, the sort of ABC books that I was, a lot of her books are structured that way. And once I had a way also to see it in pieces so I could then start filling in, that's when I could finally start writing.
そのパズルのピースみたいなのをまず構造を揃えてからそれで書き始められるって感じ。
私の書き方を特にこの辺りの人たちの書き方をじゃあちょっと言ってみますね。
So I just want to explain how I write, and especially from this book, この辺りの人たち people from my neighborhood.
私は構造は あんまり考えません。
Actually, I'm not really think about structures.
まず言葉、一つの言葉が私の中に生まれてくるとか思いつく。
So first of all, I tend to come up with one word in my head.
そうするとそこからの連想で一つの文章ができます。
And then this one word becomes like one sentence.
そうするとその文章が元で次の文章ができます。
And then this one first sentence, because of this, and then the second sentence is born.
ですからそうやって書いていくのは私にとって迷路の中を先に何があるかわからない迷路の中を歩いていくようなそんな書き方ですね。
So it's like me walking in a maze. This is kind of my way of writing.
ですから最初にその先を考えないのは一緒ですけれども、構造を考えるアダムと構造をあまり考えない、最近のものは時々構造は考えるんですけど、こういう短い話だと全く構造は考えないっていうのは違いは面白いですね。
So our similarity is like we start to write without knowing the ending, but the difference between us is definitely you think about the structure first, and I typically don't. So until these days, I really didn't think about structures first. That's probably the difference.
でそうやって書いたこの辺りの人たちを今読んでみたいと思います。
これは考えないで書いたんですね。
考えないで書いた。
So I'm going to read a little bit from この辺りの人たち people from neighborhood, and then I definitely didn't think about structures first.
大丈夫。ハエの王、この辺りギャンブルはどうなの？越してきたばかりの酒井さんに聞かれた。この辺りのギャンブルは町外れのマルジーが取り仕切っている。マルジーというのは通称で、まん丸の腹をしてまん丸の眼鏡をかけているのでそう呼ばれている。マルジーのギャンブルは豚のハエだ。10匹並べた豚のそれぞれに何匹のハエがたかるかを競う。豚？ハエ？酒井さんは驚いたように体をブルブル震わせた。マルジーは何しろ動体視力が優れているので、動き回るハエをすべて識別して数えることができるのだ。もちろんビデオ判定もできるが、ほとんど必要がない。
The title of my story is Lord of the Flies. Hey, any gambling joints in these parts? Sakai asked me. He just moved into our neighborhood. Gambling in our area was controlled by Uncle Round, who ran an operation on the outskirts of town. His nickname came from his round belly and the round spectacles he always wore. Uncle Round's specialty was the hog and fly game. He would line up 10 pigs, and people would compete to guess how many flies were buzzing around each pig. Pigs? Flies? Sakai asked. The idea so excited him he was shaking like a leaf. Uncle Round had exceptional kinetic vision, which allowed him to discern the exact number of flies around each pig at any given time. There was a video camera they could have used, but it was seldom needed.
翌日、酒井さんはマルジーの賭場に出かけていった。深夜まで帰ってこなかった。儲かりましたか？翌日聞くと、酒井さんは札束を見せびらかした。厚さ1センチはあったろうか。一緒に行かないかと誘われたが断った。いつかかなえちゃんに無理やり連れて行かれ3000円すったことがあるからだ。当時はまだ高校生だったので痛手だった。
Sakai headed off to Uncle Round's establishment the following day. He didn't come back until very late that night. How'd you get on? I asked him the next day. He pulled out a wad of notes and waved it under my nose. It was nearly an inch thick. He asked if I would go with him, but I said no. Kanaya had dragged me along with her once, and I had lost 3,000 yen. I was still in high school at the time, so it really hurt.
酒井さんは毎日帳に入り浸った。服装が派手になり、女が何人も出入りするようになり、何台もの外車が並ぶようになった。酒井さんがあまりにも受けるので、マルジーの賭場はだんだんに寂れてきた。 いかさまをしているのではないかという噂もあったけれど、見破ることはできなかった。そのうちにマルジーは賭場から姿を消した。代わりにオーナーとなったのは無論酒井さんで、すぐさま大掛かりな工事が始まった。キャバクラや怪しげなバーやおでん屋やプールが併設され、マルジーの時代には裸だった豚たちは、きらびやかな金糸銀糸の衣装を着せられた。賭場の大門にはブロンズの豚の首が掲げられ、その首にはやはりこれもブロンズの細かな灰がみっしりたかっているのだった。
Sakai immersed himself in the gambling scene, going to Uncle Round's every evening. He took to wearing flashy clothes, dating a chorus line of women, and buying a string of foreign cars. Sakai won so much money that Uncle Round's operation started going downhill. Rumor had it that Sakai was cheating, but no one was able to work out exactly how. At a certain point, Uncle Round disappeared. His successor was, no surprise here, Sakai, who wasted little time before launching a massive renovation. He added a cabaret club, a dodgy bar, an udon noodle shop, a swimming pool, and more. And he draped the pigs, who had been naked in Uncle Round's day, in glittering outfits made of gold and silver thread. He placed the bronze head of a pig above the entrance. It was studded with lots of tiny flies, also done in bronze.
町の人たちは気味悪がって近づかなかったが、外の人たちが盛んに出入りするようになった。風紀が乱れ、スナック愛のおばさんや犬学校の校長先生や八郎たちが反対同盟を作ってデモをしたが、効果は全くなかった。ある日、マルジーが帰ってきたという噂が流れた。それから数日後、酒井さんは行方不明となった。賭場は再び錆びれ、やがて昔の通りの素朴な裸の豚のギャンブルを細々と行う場所へと戻っていった。
All this grossed out the townsfolk, who gave the place a wide berth, but outsiders thronged there. Public morals suffered as a result. The lady who ran the bar Love, the dog school principal, Hachiro, and others joined forces to demonstrate against a gambling joint to no effect whatsoever. One day, a rumor spread that Uncle Round was back in town. A few days after that, Sakai disappeared. The gambling joint again went into decline, reverting to what it had been in the old days, a bare-bones operation with unpretentious, naked pigs.
ずいぶん経ってからマルジーにこっそり聞くと、簡単に本当のことを教えてくれた。酒井さんに復讐しようと、マルジーは真夜中一人で酒井さんの家に行き、ナイフで酒井さんの心臓のあたりを思い切り刺したのだ。するとなんと、酒井さんだったものは何万匹のハエとなって散っていったそうだ。あれはハエの王だったんだね、きっと。だから殺人罪は適用されないよ。マルジーは言い、まん丸の腹をポンと叩いた。ブロンズの豚の頭はハエの王の記念としてマルジーの家の押し入れに今もしまってあるという。
Much later, I had an opportunity to ask Uncle Round in private what the real story was, and he gave me the unvarnished truth. He had gone to Sakai's house looking for revenge and had ended up stabbing him several times in the heart. At that moment, believe it or not, what we had called Sakai turned into a large swarm of flies and flew away. So he was the Lord of the Flies, no question. That's why I can never be charged with murdering a human, Uncle Round said, thumping his round stomach. It's said that to this day, Uncle Round keeps the bronze pig's head in his cupboard, a relic of the Lord of the Flies. Oh, sure. The Lord of the Flies, of course, we know another Lord of the Flies. This is, I think, kind of, actually, I'd like to ask you, did you start with the title? Did you get the idea for the story from the title?
タイトルから始めました。
From the title first.
Yeah, so it's like riffing, right? You take a title, which is on one work, and then you spin off a new story from that. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah.
ハエノーっていう小説からどのぐらい離れられるかってちょっと考えながら書きました。ハエノーってゴールディングの。
So there is a book, The Lord of the Flies by Golding.
Yes.
That's the original book. Then I was trying to get away from the original book as much as possible.
Thank you. Yes.